Yeah. All right. Yeah, you are up.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Good morning, everyone here. We are about to go ahead and get started with our panel first. Welcome to the panel on the rhetoric of Black preaching. My name is Carl Frederick Hill, first year PhD student at the University of Memphis, Department of Film and Communication. My research interests intersect at rhetoric, African American rhetoric, sacred rhetoric, and philosophy. And I'm glad to invited to chair this panel by Dr. Johnson and looking forward to today. So, what we'll do as we get ready to present, we're going to ask each of our panelists prior to presentation to briefly introduce yourself and go ahead and get into presentation. So, first up, we have Edward Williams from Columbia International University.
All right. Well, great morning, everyone. Again, my name is Edward Williams. Dr. Johnson and Pastor Hill, is it all right if I share my screen? Awesome.
You should be able
I
to.
think everyone, yeah.
Okay. All right. As I am doing so, I would like to again say thank you so much, Dr. Johnson and your team for putting on this incredible experience. And thank you for even allowing me to just be in the room. I am a third year PhD student at Columbia International University, and I am asking for your prayers because on next month, Lord's willing, I will be defending for that degree. So I'm just so glad to be in the room. But for the sake of time, I would like to title this piece this morning, Missiology for Urban Ministry. In this presentation, I analyze the intersectionality of hip hop and preaching in the Black church tradition. Hip hop, as an embodiment of Black faith, fully embraces the body, soul, and mind of early African Christianity. In so doing, I propose that hip hop and Black preaching serve as missiological, liberationist tools for strategic ministry in urban American contexts. Soul music as sacred communication. Throughout the 19th century, Black slaves used music as a tool for liberation. Groups of enslaved Africans gathered in secret meetings on plantations out of view and against the wishes of their slave masters. There, they engaged in worship and socialization. Their worship was very different from that of their European American slave masters. In fact, James Cone suggests it was their way of saying that they were made for freedom and not slavery. Spirituals were the response of a people who had found themselves desperately in need of that living reality, which gave meaning to life. Upon this foundation, soul music was birthed. In Black church tradition, soul music includes emotion, melody, lament, pause, intonation, and that good thing we call celebration. It invokes a response that is distinct in pattern and tone. It is self affirming, a music and space that allows us to simply be. Through soul music, man is free to be himself, whether in compliance or rebellion, in laying waste or waiting. Black preaching as a sacred homiletic. In the Black church, preaching embraces the liberation of the whole person. It is, number one, like jazz. It includes a call and response, improvisation, syncopation, polyrhythms, and instonato. Number two, it is dialogical, meaning that it travels both vertically and horizontal. As the preacher exegetes the text, he or she raises their voice, inviting the audience in. And that old tradition of the entire congregation joins in. You tell the story, Rayo. Amen. You're talking right. Make it plain. Number three, it is expositional. It interprets the original intent of the biblical writers while while empathizing on the side of the poor and marginalized. Much like early slave Christianity, Black preaching reimagines social identity and a refuge for current urban communities. Here we go. The historical tension. We're looking at the prophetic voice of hip hop in all of America from 1978 to now. Following desegregation, hip hop exposed the socioeconomic shifts that took place in once thriving urban communities. 1978, following integration, hip hop exposed these social and economic flights from the inner city. For most of Black America, it was felt most in the urban context. For example, Sugar Hill Gang's 1978 Rapper's Delight record said, I said a hip hop, the hippie to the hip hop. You don't stop the rock to the bang, bang, boogie, say up, jump to boogie, the rhythm of the boogie to the beat. At its origin, hip hop represented an escape from the sad realities of marginalized people. For them, it was freedom, dance, and togetherness for urban youth. But the distance between 1978 and 1982 exposed the dark truth regarding white flight, redlining, and suburbanization. As white residents fled from the inner city, many businesses and affluent Black families soon followed suit. In rebellion, Black artists and poets continued to tell their stories ground up. Hip hop quickly became a representation for all of Black urban America. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. That year, hip hop shed light on the demise of urban Black American communities. This demise was the direct descent of, again, white flight, but also the beginning war on drugs. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five detail these shifts or these pandemics in the record The Message. Describing the ghetto as the inner city, Flash argues, it's like a jungle sometimes. It takes me wonder how I keep from going under. He continues, you grow in the ghetto, living second rate, and your eyes will sing a song of deep hate. The places you play and where you stay looks like one big alleyway. You'll admire all the number book takers, thugs, pimps, and pushers, and the big money makers. You see, you all, for many urban Americans, the ghetto was a jungle that kept many low-income families trapped and going under. Capitalism and suburbanization, grossly connected to white flight, left these once thriving communities with little to no revenue simply to survive. This motif birthed an escapism, also as a euphoria for many future Black middle-class families and churches. Since that time, hip-hop embodies what Dr. William H. Curtis, I heard Pastor Hill say his name early, sermonically describes as living in the tension of the text. Rather than escaping the tense realities of the ghetto and moving to the suburbs, hip-hop bridges the socioeconomic gap. It defiantly beats against the pressure to assimilate or to surrender to mainstream acceptance. Using rhyme, instrumentation, metaphor, repetition, and simile, hip-hop gives hope to the forgotten and the outsider, not as a means to an end or to escape, rather as a promise to be at peace in this world and the afterlife. See, hip-hop does not rush toward a resolution. Instead, it beautifies one's unfortunate realities within social inequality, patriarchy, otherness, poverty, and marginalization. In so doing, the MC both challenges and empowers the audience not to run from their realities, but to find beauty in them. This aligns with what Walter Broadman defines as prophetic imagination. From this premise, I propose that Black pastors and inner city congregations interpret hip hop as a missional means for intercultural worship and improvisational preaching. Proposal 1, urban congregations embrace modes of soul intercultural worship. Soul music has many layers: creation, preservation, and adaptation. For faith communities within the urban context, soul music as participatory worship communicates to an intergenerational audience. This audience is comprised of baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. Each generation shares commonalities of experience and perspective. Thus, intercultural worship embraces the soul of hip hop as a clear Black religious expression. This includes dance, poetry, call and response, contemplation, and improvisation. Proposal 2, pastors adopt an intercultural, improvisational homiletic when expositing biblical passages. For me, intercultural preaching considers the culture, the language, and the emotional barriers of its audience. Such intercultural competence guides what Jared Alcantara defines as intercultural improvisational preaching, which is also called crossover preaching. He suggests that to foster this, it requires a dispensational commitment to improvisational, intercultural proficiency as a way of being and acting. You see, Alcantara coins this preaching in honor of Gardner Calvin Taylor. Known as the Dean of African American Preaching, Taylor's preaching is a unique blend of various traditions. His preaching modeled adaptness to improvisation in the broader sense of communicating across cultural differences. So, integrating Taylor's preaching, Alcantara suggests that preachers take on the lead performative theory to preach with such intercultural improvisational homiletics. For Alcantara, lead can be broken down into 4 categories. It challenges us to listen, to engage, to assess, and to decenter, which asks that we not be fixed to one form of communication. This strategy can be used when interpreting hip hop. In her work, Prophets of the Hood, Imani Perry suggests that the MC sees his or herself as a kind of preacher, assuming the kind of intellectualism, exposition, and authority of that role. As preacher, the MC provides a literal exegesis of both hip-hop realism and life that interprets our world. Intercultural improvisational preaching explores those dynamics, such as space, contextualization, metaphor, and simile. And this pedagogy can be seen in the prophet herself, Lauryn Hill's 2002 Just Like Water performance. In the 3rd verse, she sings, bathing in the fountain of his essence. He causes my expression to remain, humbled on the mountain by his presence, washing my intentions with his name, sealing all the floodgates of his passion, saving all his liquid for his own, moisturizing me to satisfaction in my imagination. Oh no, he's pouring out his soul to me for hours and hours, drawing out my nature with his hands. Yearning, I'm so thirsty for his power, burning to be worthy of his land. Just like the Black preacher, Prophet Hill induces sensory detail in literary devices that bring rhetoric to life. The imagery of bathing just juxtaposes the presence of the man she desires. Without confirming his identity, Hill is mesmerized by the nature of his name and his hands. She acknowledges the human body as one that lives and yearns for him, but that him is God. While deeply realistic, Hill's lyrics flirt with exaggeration and mysticism. Emoting a variety of vocal tones and inflections, she poetically weaves through the tenor of the Apostle Paul's epistle to the church in Rome. Beginning in Romans 6, Paul says, therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too may walk in the newness of life. For if we have become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Hill's references to the male's name and power resembles Paul's reference to Christ. She is thirsty for his power and burns to be worthy of his land. Is submerged into the waters of baptism. Her nature is being cleansed and purified. His name, presence, and hands provoke Hill to submit her being to his will. You see, the lines between the MC and the preacher are blurred. The cross-reference of her spiritual imagination and Romans 6 embrace the metaphorical genius of what we call the Black church. So, in this sermonic discourse, the Holy Spirit unites the human soul with God through hip hop and Black preaching. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. Now we'll move on to Christopher Harris, University of Memphis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Harris. I am a third year PhD student here at the University of Memphis. Almost done, praise the Lord. Native of North Carolina. And so we'll get right into it. I want to also thank Dr. Johnson for this opportunity. I am very grateful. And to my panelists, Mr. Williams, thank you. And Carl, thank you. So today, I don't have a screen to share, but I want to, I'm in the process of working on my proposal. And so I would like to share where I am, just talk about some thoughts of where I am and everything. So the title thus far is named Echoes of the Pulpit, Reimagining and Reinterpreting Black Preaching, a rhetorical and textual analysis of oral tradition, storytelling, and cultural identity. In an article, Andrea Collier quoted, "For Black people, storytelling is both our roots and our wings. The stories that we tell are not only the embodiment of our past and present, but a critical piece in the shaping of our future. The aspect of the Black oral tradition is critical, not just for the sake of telling stories or being heard, but the element of the Black oral tradition is rooted in sacred memory and sacred expression of the African American culture. What about storytelling raises such importance in African American culture? Leaning into the roots of the oral tradition is something that connects Black identity and Black expression. To examine the Black oral tradition is to see Black expression and embodiment of self. In the words of Zora Neale Hurston, Negro speech is a weird thing, full of ams and is. So the question becomes, in what ways do the roots of oral tradition and storytelling contribute and connect with how we understand religion and Black preaching? In his collection of poetic sermons, James Weldon Johnson's Gosh Trombone, published in 1927, is more than just a literary work of poetic expression, but it is a powerful reimagining of the Black sermonic and rhetorical tradition put in written form. My dissertation hopes to investigate how Johnson captures the oral power of Black preaching, translating that into the rhythms, rhetorical strategies, and theological depths of the pulpit. So a central question that has come up as I continue to do my research is, how does Gosh Trombones reinterpret and preserve the African American sermonic tradition? And what does this reinterpretation reveal about Black culture, identity, theological expressions, hope, and resistance? And so I have three parts thus far that I've been working on. So part three is the Black preaching tradition and oral culture. Before we can fully understand Gosh Trombones, it's essential to recognize the significance of oral tradition in African American history. And so this is where I speak of the Black preacher as a griot, and that the African American preacher emerges from the West African tradition, the West African griot tradition, where oral storytellers preserved communal identity and history, and that enslaved Africans and Americans continue that tradition in the pulpit, and preachers were seen as both spiritual and cultural leaders. I also want to emphasize with Johnson's work to bridge literature and oral tradition, and that the study hopes to position Gosh Trombones as a pivotal work that bridges oral and written traditions, contributing to understanding how African American culture expressions continue to evolve and adapt over time. Also, to argue and see how it elevates Black preaching, analyzing Johnson's poetic sermons alongside actual contemporary sermons allows the research to highlight the artistry, theology, and rhetorical brilliance found in the Black preaching tradition. And then that goes into the second part of thus far of what I'm looking at, Gosh Trombones as a literary and theological bridge. So uh, why a trombone? I played trombone in middle school like years ago, and so I did some research again. And so what is interesting is Johnson argues, and also other research, is that the trombone is one of the instruments that is closest to the human voice. So it is capable of bending notes, swelling with emotion, mimicking the inflections of speech. And so looking at that to see how that reflects not only the Black preachers, how they use their voice, but also using that as a metaphor to talk about the differences that is in Black preaching, because not all Black preaching is the same. So maybe sticking to see how Johnson's metaphor of the trumpet speaks to the intersection and the diversity of Black preaching itself. Also, to see reinforcing cultural heritage, analyzing God's trombones preserves the sermonic tradition, and this research can inspire greater appreciation for the role of preaching and oral tradition within African American culture and theology, and also a sense of strengthening community identity, highlighting historical and cultural significance of Black preaching. And so I hope my research fosters a deeper connection to the church's role in shaping African American identity and resilience. And so the last part, why God's trombone still matters. So my research hopefully is not one that simply as a means of reflecting on Johnson's work, but also a means of what that work means for today. And so seeing and connecting the influence on contemporary preaching and literature, connecting preachers, Black preachers today, such as Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, Reverend Dr. F. Bruce Williams, Freddie Haynes, Reginald Sharp, Dr. Stewart's sermon, for example, what are we going to do with Jesus of Nazareth when she preached it at the National Baptist Convention, with the aspect of combining storytelling and Black oral tradition with prophetic social commentary, or looking at Otis Moss III, who blends, well, Otis Moss III and Dr. Freddie Haynes, who blends hip hop and storytelling, but also with the prophetic witness, or going back to preachers of legend, such as Dr. Prather Hall, whose sermons are reflective of spiritual liberation and prophetic voice, connecting with maybe Johnson's uh, poetry in regards to Let My People Go in Johnson's work, or leaning into James Baldwin's work, Fire Next Time, whose Baldwin's prophetic voice and narrative style is reflective in God's Trombone. His work provides a modern lens for exploring social justice and cultural identity and spiritual resilience in Black preaching, carrying that over into the literary works. And lastly, thinking of theological and cultural significance, seeing how God's trombones offer a bridge between oral and literary preservation, ensuring that the unique artistry of Black preaching is not lost, but also invites us as scholars to be more investigative of theology, literature, African American rhetoric, and performance studies. And so lastly, as I continue to develop this project, I aim to explore how oral traditions function as a form of resistance, sacred memory, and theological meaning and making in African American religious life. Hopefully to examine God's trombones through interdisciplinary lens, hope not only to highlight its literary artistry, but also emphasize its ongoing relevance in the Black church and Black preaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we are going to move to our next panelist, and I think we should all virtually stand for this one. There is such thing, Dr. Andre Johnson, University of Memphis.
Boy, I tell you, these preachers, I tell you. Uh, thank you, thank you. Listen, I had not planned on presenting, but when a couple of people could not make it and we had to reshuffle and shift, I come from the school of be ready in season and out. So, so I will talk a little bit about the Black sermon as a rhetorical artifact. And I'm actually, laying all jokes aside, I'm actually happy to have this opportunity because this particular piece, of course, I won't have time for the whole thing, but this particular piece is hopefully will be coming out real soon later on this spring as part of a special issue in the Journal of the Sermon Studies Journal, I think. Yeah, Sermon Studies Journal. So, and when that comes out, of course, we will definitely share it. Me and Courtney Buggs had an opportunity to edit that special issue on the Black preaching tradition and the rhetoric of the Black pulpit. The Black sermon as rhetorical artifact. Eric C. Miller argues that throughout the nation's history, the sermon has stood among the most ubiquitous forms of American oratory. However, he laments that despite its historical significance, the sermon has rarely been central to scholars of American rhetoric. Arguing that sermons matter, Miller collected 9 essays framing the sermon as an object of rhetorical study by examining the sermonic text. And if you want to look at that book, it's The Rhetoric of the Protestant Sermon in America, Pulpit Discourse at the Turn of the Millennium, Lexington Books, 2020. With this volume of essays, Miller intends to prompt new scholarly conversation about sermonizing, and so help revitalize pulpit rhetoric as an object of critical inquiry. He argues that even in the increasingly secular age, the sermon continues to exert profound weekly influence on American life. For Miller, quote, perhaps more than any other rhetorical genre, the sermon shapes worldviews, reinforces values, and informs the civic practice of millions of citizens. For these and other reasons, he continues, the sermon demands another look. Now, though the significance of rhetoric in the Black preaching tradition has received increased attention as of late, engaging the Black sermon through rhetorical analysis remains limited. According to Sonia Falls, rhetorical criticism, the method to examine these sermons, is a, quote, qualitative research method that is designed for the systemic investigation and explanation of symbolic acts and artifacts for the purpose of understanding rhetorical processes. The process of rhetorical criticism moves us from just liking the sermon or not liking the sermon, from, quote, she really preached, or he dumped the house, or they didn't leave anything standing, to a more conscious, systemic, and focused way of understanding. False writes, quote, through the study and practice of rhetorical criticism, we can understand and explain why we like or don't like something by investigating the symbols themselves. We can begin to make statements about the messages rather than statements about our feelings. False further argues that rhetorical critics are interested in discovering what an artifact teaches about the nature of rhetoric. In simpler terms, these critics strive to enhance our understanding of rhetorical theory as a whole. By engaging in the process of theorizing, they provide valuable insights and explanations regarding the mechanisms behind how rhetoric functions in various contexts. Moreover, I would like to emphasize that a deep examination of the rhetorical criticism of sermons could significantly enrich homiletical theory. Understanding the intricacies of rhetoric within sermons not only sheds light on their persuasive elements, but also contributes to the broader study of preaching and communication within religious contexts. Now, some scholars have already started on this journey. For example, in his book, Frank Thomas highlights the function of rhetoric within the African American preaching tradition. As Thomas writes, while scholars have debated the merits of rhetoric and homiletics for centuries within the Black preaching tradition, Black preaching has always been rhetorical and theological. For Thomas, the rhetorical processes are fundamental to African American preaching and not something that one adds on after the preacher has figured out the rational content of what to say. Two other significant works stand out in exploring the intricate dynamics of rhetoric and its various functions. First, Kimberly P. Johnson's The Womanist Preacher, Proclaiming Womanist Rhetoric from the Pulpit in 2017, and Earl J. Fisher's The Reverend Albert Clegg Jr. and the Black Prophetic Tradition, a reintroduction of the Black Messiah in 2021. Both texts stem from the author's dissertations and, to my knowledge, represent the only comprehensive examinations of Black sermons as vital rhetorical artifacts. Now, while studies directly focusing on Black sermons as objects of rhetorical analysis have received scant attention, I personally feel a change is coming for two reasons, which I only have time to highlight one today. First, graduate departments are producing students interested in studying Black sermons as the rhetorical artifacts they are. For instance, Johnson and Fisher are graduates of the Rhetoric program in the Department of Communication and Film at the University of Memphis. Since its founding of the PhD program in the 1990s, the department has had a strong emphasis on rhetoric and even religious rhetoric. In the fall of 2003, Frank Thomas and I started the program. While we were both interested in rhetorical studies and religious rhetoric, we were also interested in studying African American religious rhetoric and Black oratory. While we did not focus our dissertations on the analyses of sermons as rhetorical artifacts, they did lead us to write our department's first dissertations on Black oratory. In the spring of 2008, Thomas defended I'm Happy Tonight, Martin Luther King Jr.'s discourse of prophetic reconciliation, and I followed in the summer of 2008 with the prophetic oratory of Henry McNeil Turner. Both dissertations were under the direction of the esteemed scholar of rhetoric, Michael C. Leff. At the time, Leff served as director of the graduate program and taught close reading as an approach to rhetorical criticism. We learn on the left that rhetoric is a contextual art that finds its home within a particular situation and context. And as I have argued before, rhetoric at its best is not a list of theoretical concepts in search of a perfect text to demonstrate rhetoric's vitality. Instead, rhetoric is a study of the rhetorical situations that gave rise to the response and examinations of how a speaker, writer, has invited the audience to respond. It is not a study of how audiences responded, but only of how the speaker invited the audience to respond. Therefore, rhetorical criticism at its best is a study of language from a particular context in which a speaker/writer felt a need to respond. And since then, the department has garnered a reputation for producing students focusing on African American religious rhetoric. Since Frank Thomas and I completed our studies in 2008, others, such as Kimberly P. Johnson, Say Amen for the Sisters, The Rhetoric of Womanist Preacher in 2010, Mitty Carey, Freedom, Faith of Prathia Hall, A Hybrid of Rhetoric of Protest in 2012, Earl J. Fisher, A Close Reading of Abba Clegg Jr., The Black Messiah, A Study of Rhetorical Hermeneutics, Black Prophetic Rhetoric and Radical Black Politics in 2018, Thomas First, Words from Elsewhere, The Rhetoric of 19th Century African American Prophetic Call Narratives in 2022, Lionel Badu Smith, Too Tired to Code Switch, Analyzing the Prophetic Rhetoric of Critical Black Language Awareness in 2023, Ayo Morton, Filling the Biblical Gap, Creating Sacred Rhetoric for Blues Women Through Womanist Vernacular Discourse in 2023, De'Aaron M., But I Couldn't Keep It to Myself, James Cone's Articulation of Resistive Prophetic Rhetoric in 2023, and Pierre L. Vincent's A Historical and Prescriptive Analysis of the Iconic Black Eulogy as Prophetic Rhetoric 2024. All of them continue to build on the legacy and tradition of the department. When the exciting opportunity to join the faculty of the Department of Communication and Film at the University of Memphis arose, I had a strong desire to uphold the rich legacy of the program. In the fall of 2015, I returned with a vision to create a program within a program that specifically explored the intricate intersection of rhetoric, race, and religion. This initiative enabled me to expand upon the foundational work I had previously undertaken at Memphis Theological Seminary, where I had the privilege of developing a robust sacred rhetoric program, the first of my knowledge in any seminary or divinity school in the country. Furthermore, during my time at the University of Memphis, I embraced the chance to recruit PhD students who were passionate about delving into various dimensions of African American religious communication, fostering a vibrant academic community dedicated to exploring these critical subjects. So far, I have had the privilege of guiding and supporting 10 doctoral candidates through the entire dissertation process, leading them to successfully completion of their research projects. And I think I got a few more in the wings that's trying to get through. While I was busy building program at the University of Memphis, Frank Thomas was busy creating the first PhD program dedicated to studying African American preaching at Christian Theological Seminary in 2017. Drawn upon his rhetoric influences from the University of Memphis, Thomas titled the program African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric. Concerned with the stereotypical belief that African American preaching was full of ignorance, buffoonery, and emotionalism, Thomas sought to create a program that highlighted the history, beauty, depth, power, and sheer genius, quote unquote, of Black preaching. Since its inception, the program has enrolled three cohorts of practitioner scholars, heading to a fourth one now, created and hosted the Mixed Methods Preaching Conference, started the Preaching Legacy series, and participated in the Lilly Endowment's Compelling Preaching Initiative. However, the program's enduring legacy will be the students they will graduate. Grounded in the foundation and theoretical frameworks of both homiletics and rhetoric, students in this program will more likely view the sermon as a rhetorical artifact. Moreover, while all students who graduate from the program will focus on something, while all the students would not focus on the sermon as a rhetorical artifact, many will. This is evidenced by the first four graduates of the program. Nicole McDonald, who is the program's first graduate, Yvette A. Flunder, the apocalyptic prophet in 2024, Justin West, preaching with his back against the wall, Howard Thurman, race and sacred rhetoric in Marsh Chapel, 1953 to 1962, Eugene Gibson, son of Abraham, examining the African-American prophetic rhetoric of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and Jennifer Connor, the contextual art of African-American folk preaching tradition, all in 2024. In conclusion, in 1925, historian Carter G. Woodson unveiled a significant work titled Negro Orators and Their Orations. Woodson contended that the ultimate objective of the orator was to guide society toward a harmonious alignment with their perceived ideas. For him, the essence of compelling oratory lies in its challenging nature, not merely a citation of prescribed rules, but a profound sense of duty and an inward call that compels the orator to speak from a place of authentic conviction. This drive emanates from a deeply rooted desire to make things right, to make them in balance and in harmony, reflecting the orator's commitment to effecting meaningful change and fostering a society that resonates with shared ideas. I argue that this understanding of orators and oratory foreshadowed the African epistemological concepts of nomo and mot, would make Woodson one of the first scholars to examine African American pulpit oratory. Before Woodson, treatments of African American preaching and pulpit oratory came mainly in sermon collections. Woodson would build on this and argue that these sermons and African American pulpit oratory be seen in what we now call public address. Before Woodson's introduction, for example, from 1915 to 1925, outside of two reviews on preaching reviewed by J.M. O'Neill and Herbert A. Wichhelms, there were not any studies devoted to preaching in the early scholarship and journals of rhetoric and public address. However, after Woodson's Negro Orator, scholars populated the field with preaching studies, but none of them focused on African American preaching. Almost 100 years after Woodson's writing, following Woodson and those who have laid the foundation of the study of Black sermons, I call for scholars, homileticians, rhetoricians, and all who are concerned and study the power of language to look at the sermon again but more specifically, look at the Black sermon again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you to all of our presenters. We have roughly about 33 minutes, 32, 33 minutes for Q&A. So if you would, we'll try to govern it by raising hands and we'll just address you from there. So the floor is open for questions at this time.
And let me add, you can also use the chat if you want to put a question in the chat as well.
Dr. Johnson?
Yes.
Hey, can you hey friend, how are
Hey,
you?
what's up, my friend?
I would love for you to say something about, and you may have said it, but I want you to say a little bit more about the need to build this bridge from
Mhm.
the academy to theological education and the importance of studying rhetoric as a means of religious communication and sermons as it relates to doctor of ministry programs and things of that sort.
Well, so glad that you asked that because, as you know, we are working together on a new D-Min program um, that is titled now Preaching and Religious Communication. Um, for the longest period of time, um, I frame it this way. For the longest period of time, scholars, a lot of scholars, not all scholars, but a lot of scholars within my field of rhetoric and communication studies in the field of homiletics looked at the sermon as separate from public address or even religious communication. It was something separate. But as Eric C. Miller has demonstrated in his work, and as I have tried to do in my own work, that there is not a genre of speech that is more in the public understanding nomenclature. Let me use that word in the public nomenclature than the sermon. And for us not to examine the sermon as a rhetorical artifact in and of itself um, is just surprising. And so, what I want to do, and it's part of my research agenda, is to have folk actually read and analyze sermon text. This is what many folk are hearing each and every week, depending on your preaching style, 20, 40, 60 minutes, maybe even longer, every week. And they are shaping their lives around this one particular act every week. And so, whether good, bad, or indifferent, now we can talk about that later, but whether good, bad, or indifferent, they are digesting this and many of them are going out and repeating this to other coworkers and people that are not. So for us not to look at this as a serious piece of public address. Um, I think it's, I think I won't say derelict in our duties. That's too strong. But I think that we really miss an opportunity to understand what's going on in the real world. How about that? That's good. Yeah, we miss an opportunity to really understand. So we would not be surprised at what we see. We would not be, oh, shocked. I didn't understand. My understanding of Burke did not lead me to, but a fair reading of Burke, he does a rhetoric of religion. So the point I'm just trying to make is yes, to make the connection is to analyze to make the connection is analyzing these sermons, but also having the preacher or the practitioner also understand rhetoric and the moves in which she or he or they can operate in and helping them become even better communicators.
Do you think that, and I'll just open this up to anybody.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking about the when Obama was running for president
Uh-huh.
and the way that they took Dr. Jeremiah Wright's sermon and basically just took a piece of it and used that as a means to really in some way, I guess, strategize eventually Obama had to separate himself from
Right.
Trinity because of the backlash that came along with Jeremiah Wright's "Goddamn America."
Right.
And so, as it relates to the use of sermons as a political tool, not only to support, but also to divide, um, are you also saying that in learning rhetorical style and understanding that, could that sermon been written differently? Are you saying
Um,
that could it be that they did not explain it and share it in such a way that the people could really grasp and understand what he was really trying to say? Just a little, just
yeah,
I
no,
don't know.
no, great. That's a great question. If anybody, I don't want to monopolize all the time because she's opening it up to anyone else. But I do have an answer. I do have an answer, but I will give someone else an opportunity to.
And Dr. Buckle, I'll jump in here. One of the things that I'm hearing specifically here, I'm listening through the I guess the lens or the ear gates of a Foucauldian model, where politics is indicative of one's relationship to power, right? And through this lens, to answer specifically the question, could it have been written differently? Should it have been written differently? I think if we look at, what prophetic rhetoric does and what it is, uh, we have to almost argue that prophetically that it is inspired to be said at the moment. And so now we have to get into the framework of determinism and all these other different aspects of theology. But in that moment, it was, although offensive, but Jeremiah Wright and the people that he represent, their relationship to power is quite different than the ones who critiqued what he said. So it was absolutely necessary in the moment. And so because of the South Side of Chicago's relationship to organized politics in terms of Democratic parties, like the relationship to power is quite different than the power structure that would put them in a position to see America through that lens. So I would argue that it had to be said the way that it was said to invoke serious thought about critique of power.
All right, amen. Wait a minute. Anybody else want to cause because Christy, you bring up the point. I mean, you actually make my argument. I remember that because I was in grad school studying prophetic rhetoric at the time. And even my professors and even folk in the program were like, oh, wow, why did he do? Well, first of all, he didn't do it in real time. This was an older sermon. They brought back this whole notion of contextualization matters and stuff. That's what we study, right? So that laying that aside, the only reason you had a problem with that is because you didn't understand the prophetic preaching tradition. That's the only reason. And and most of this was political gamesmanship to just try to, score some political points. But for the people who really, honestly struggle with that, if you understood the prophetic tradition, that's why a whole lot of, folk that went to black churches were like, what, that, way to go. That's was no, you're talking about, that was the perfect example of these, the proverbial two Americas and this whole notion about, because notice the critique, nobody critiqued what he said. The critiques was like, oh well, you can't say nothing about that. But it's how you say it. It was all about another rhetorical term, decorum. You didn't do it the right way. And in the prophetic tradition, as I think Tom is on here, yeah, Tom, I see Tom in his new book, the prophetic, prophetic pearl. decorum be damned. No, in the prophetic tradition, it's, the speaker dictates what the rhetorical situation is. And for that particular time, remember, rhetoric finds its home in the particular. So in that particular time, in that particular moment, that's what the speaker felt, discerned, led, called, whatever the word you want to use, that I needed to say at that moment to get my message across. So
Doc, can I take
that's
a
why
shot?
we should study sermons. Yes, everybody go study a sermon.
Doc,
So we
can I
have,
take a shot at it as well?
Oh, go ahead,
Uh,
Bert.
it's Chad White. And so for me, the prophetic tradition is it's those outside of it and not exposed to it. They find it very difficult because even Doc Thomas talked about this dangerous sermon. And I think that anytime you speak truth to power or address inequities, you're going to be preaching dangerous sermons, and that's what I think the prophets do, and those who are oppressed and marginalized that sees salvation as much more than just going to heaven, but as a widening of the way to build a just and equitable society. We preach dangerous sermons every time we preach. I mean, Jesus was a dangerous, rabbi, and so of course, empire and kingdom never will get along. Moses never played golf with Pharaoh. You know, uh, Jezebel never did hang out with Jeremiah, and so Jesus and Caesar. Though you're going to have those conflicts, and I think it's imperative upon those who practice preaching and participate in the praxis of prophetic preaching to have that prophetic imagination, and then also recognize that the media is going to slant it the way they want to slant it. The sermon was never called "Goddamn a Goddamn America." It's called "God and Government," and we never heard
Right.
that mentioned in media. And so I think any sermon from any prophetic preacher that a snippet is taken, it can be manipulated and misused to fit the narrative of empire that seeks to minimize and to make impotent the effectiveness of the gospel and transformation of society through the use of biblical language.
All right.
and we got Miss Jacqueline has her hand, and then we have a question in the comments we want to address too.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists, and you all did a wonderful job, and ask that perhaps Christopher Harris could, does he see sermons as part of the oral tradition, and if he could talk a little bit about how that helps with cultural preservation, spiritual resilience, and liberation, expression, and communal empowerment. And then if Edward Williams could talk a little bit more about how he sees hip hop, because I don't know if he considers that, well, he says it's part of the church, how he sees Black preaching and hip hop propelling the church. So combining that.
Yes, ma'am. So could you repeat the last part? How sermons?
Do you see sermons as part of the oral tradition?
Oh, yes, ma'am. As I'm putting together my proposal, my idea is to find at least four sermons from four preachers. And so that's where I'm getting stuck at, trying to see what sermons would fit for what I'm trying to convey, because Black preaching is not monolithic. And I know that will be a limitation of my study, but to see what sermons that I would use. So, i.e., it has become one of my favorite sermons is my pastor, Dr. Gina Stewart's sermon, "What are we going to do with Jesus of Nazareth?" When she preached that at the National Baptist Convention, and telling that story of Pilate, and now we know her name, Pilate's wife, Claudia. And so using that oral tradition to speak prophetically, Johnson's work, he hears a sermon and puts it into written tradition. And so I'm trying to figure out how to combine those two. But no, it is definitely part of the oral tradition. It's where we get the Hutch Harbors. It's where it is a foundational piece of the embodiment of expressions of Black culture. So yes, I would say yes as well.
I think a lot of my answers are overlapping with Reverend Christopher as well. Specifically with hip hop, I'm thinking of people like Nat Turner, Freddie Hampton. I'm just thinking of people who, even when they spoke, there was a rhythm, there was a cadence. Even going back to Call Her Name Claudia, exactly what Christopher is saying. There's so many overlaps of poetry, of artistic expression that I do see the MC, especially hip hop, as a prophetic voice that speaks truth to power. I'm thinking about NWA. I'm thinking about Public Enemy. All of these different expressions, they use a spiritual undertone to speak truth to power. And so, yeah, I definitely see that hip hop in the Black church tradition um, is a prophetic voice for the church.
Don't forget the Black women in hip hop.
MC Light, Queen Latifah, all that. Yes, ma'am.
That's good. And Dr. Annette Matlock has a question in the comments. How does evangelical seminary education influence Black church rhetoric? And I had a question that I want to kind of couple with this. And I guess both Mr. Williams and Mr. Harris can kind of tackle on this one. Specifically, the influence of evangelical seminaries as expository preaching has become the order of the day, per se, in the 21st century church. And an exegetical approach to the text has been a part of it. And so Chris touched on the idea of storytelling, which led me to go down the rabbit trail of narrative preaching and how we get to expository. And so I know that within the framework of Charles Haddon, others who write on expository preaching, this has become the standard of what preaching is. So, how do we, I guess, approach Dr. Matlock's question? How does evangelical seminary education influence Black church? And I would argue, and not to take it IP wise, but how do we take it back, per se?
Exactly.
I will take it back. So I don't know if it fits, but so in one of my comprehensive questions a while ago, there was an article that I used by Quentin Schultz, Speaks of the God Problem. And in it, and I'm paraphrasing, they use that in regards to the aspect of figuring out who gets to speak for God. And so with that, I, I say, he argues that the reason why religious communication and religion and preaching may be stagnant as it is because white evangelicals have grasped the power in regards to they are the only voices they get to speak for God. When in reality, there is not one set person that gets to speak for God, or in terms of prophetic rhetoric or prophetic voice. To limit God in such a way, then you are stifling liberation for others and for other people. And so I would say, in regards to trying to take that back, is to also take back how others find freedom in God for themselves and to make space for that. I don't know that might lie if that answers that sort of question, but it made me think of that in that way. I don't know if it kind of does it, but yeah.
I'm also thinking about the training that when Black folks attend these seminaries that don't actually teach anything about Black rhetoric or the
Mhm.
Black church tradition, maybe beyond a paragraph or an article from Dr. King or something about Dr. King or something like that. So, and then also in spaces where the only thing applicable that you might be able to um, even research on your own if you have the inclination is if you're taking something like apologetics. So
Mhm.
how is that influencing the future of our church traditions, our history and legacy of the Black church?
It's a great question. Is this just for anyone, Dr. Matlock?
It's for anyone to answer
Yeah, so
because we have to put all these perspectives together.
yeah. Well, I would say it this way because I have been thinking about that as I do my own research and work and stuff. I was um, blessed to have an advisor, for instance, that admittedly did not know who Bishop Turner was, the Black rhetorical tradition, church, none of that, and encouraged me to discover and to find out. And when I found stuff, share it with him so he can be, um, um, so he can understand it a little bit better. So much so that when me and Frank came out of the program, he was convinced that African American religious communication should be a thing um, at um, the University of Memphis. And before he passed on, he was in the process of making it a thing. So um, I start my answer by just saying this, that I had a great advisor. I had great teachers that allowed me to explore this unknown 12th bishop of the AME Church. Right. So, um, what needs to happen is that there are some folk who do attend some of these seminaries and divinity schools or whatever, Bible colleges, and they don't have any of the tradition and they really push up against it. Um, but many of them just, accept that and accept it as the right thing, that this is the right way to preach, this is the right way to do theology, it's the right way to exegete a biblical text, so on and so forth, without any type of imagination whatsoever. And so a lot of them fall into that category. But the real issue is, again, when we start talking about support, finances, and money and things of that nature, what if I'm planning a church for you? And I expect for you to preach a certain kind of way. And you really want that church and you want that financial help. How you going to preach? And this is what we need to begin to really wrestle with is that I think it can happen if, I mean, the breakaway can happen if we can somehow start supporting the institutions that we say that we want institutions to be. And so it is by no accident, for instance, that Liberty University has the most PhD students studying religion in the country. And the top 10 would be those type of institutes. That's not surprising because that's where the concentration of money is. If you're looking for a place where you can go and you do not have to go into some, back-breaking debt. So that that's the other conversation that we really need to have with this, because finances and money and capital, all of that stuff, plus the fact that, because see, we had the foreparents, people like Anna Julia Cooper and W.E.D. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, who I just mentioned, and others. Imagine going through a PhD program and you the first one with nothing. You had to come up with something. And it can be done, but it's very hard in today's climate. And so, yeah, that's my answer to it. Yeah, it does have a profound influence, and we need to talk about it as much as we possibly can.
Because the other, just kind of adding to that is the fact that having the R3 Center and just a space for African American communication and rhetoric, if someone was so inclined to to take that independent study while they're in a place that doesn't actually offer any classes or courses or anything related to the Black oral tradition, they have a place to go.
Yeah,
So yeah, and
and
I
so
because I was at Bethel University, but and my professor, this little, she's just a little short, European woman. She told me I needed to stop going to school with white people and just made all these different connections so I could study outside of what that tradition was. But everybody's not going to have that opportunity. Oh, I see Rodney's hand up. Rodney lied.
Well, Dr. Medlock, you actually ventured into the area I was going to mention, so I appreciate that. And I do think I would appreciate how our scholars think of this kind of space as important too, given the economic constraints of pursuing MDivs, for example, which also would afford people to be situated in congregations, because I think that's a part of this too. It is what congregations are you a part of when you enter into seminary? What kind
yeah.
of preaching are you sitting under? And then if when you do your field education assignments, what are the opportunities there as well? But I do think this is important um, with regard to the other kinds of spaces that we have to shape that allow for continuing education, such as conferences. So I think I would like just what the scholars' thoughts on that, and then in addition, how does the media ecology shape this too? Because I have a concern about the way that there's this encroachment on other forms of communicating the gospel, or the attempts to communicate the gospel that are constrained by the media that predominate our landscape. So people moving away from the kinds of richness of sermons to how do we truncate that into a podcast, for example. Now, I don't mean to disparage that.
Uh-huh.
I, I'm just juxtaposing that, for example. So either one or the other, I'd appreciate your thoughts, and I do appreciate all the scholarship of each.
No, no. Real quick, I think that I let me just step back for a moment and to say that there can be learning education in surprisingly different places and spaces. So I want to just say that. However, there are schools that indoctrinate instead of educate. So I'm gonna tell you this is how you should think, but instead of, hey, here are the multiple ways of thinking, you know, all I need for you to do is justify why you think in this way, make an argument. Yeah, and then that's how I was trained. I was educated. I felt like I was educated. I knew a little bit about all the things. So, but um, Dr. Manlock talked about this space being this is exactly why we need to be talking about. Rodney, you made mention newly minted PhD too, by the way, Rodney lied. So, but you mentioned about media and the nomenclature, the very understanding of religion in this country. The people who are rebelling against religion and against religious institutions, the people who are just rebelling against all of that and leaving in droves, they're not rebelling against an understanding of religion that I will imagine that some of you may have. They're rebelling against the actual embedded narrative. And so we as communication scholars, as homileticians, as theologians, public theologians, need to wrestle and talk about that yes, you are rebelling. That is a real thing. And so it becomes this embedded, hovering narrative that shapes just about everything, especially our politics, our foreign policy, our domestic policy, everything. And so, as one scholar says, if you don't have anything to do with religion, that's all right. Religion got everything to do with you. They're gonna still mess with you, even if you don't mess with religion. So, yeah, thank you, Carl. We got about 4 minutes left. Maybe time for um, one more question or maybe even a comment. Thank you for this rich discussion, by the way. This is great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Can I ask Brother Williams a question though, right quick?
Yeah, yeah. So it's
Co-panelist, yeah. Uh, you were um, th- thought a wonderful job about the sermon and hip hop and all, but I did notice that you drew on let's just say um, what's the word I want? Vintage or old school or let's say what's the other word I could use? Historical hip hop references. Uh, uh, do you engage in any of the more contemporary references to make these claims, or are you making a claim that others have? I have seen the golden era of hip hop. Thank you, Rod. Or are you making the claim that maybe the golden era is its own era that speaks more to the prophetic tradition than this contemporary hip hop that we hear on the radio?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Short and sweet. I think that what we saw during the Super Bowl with Prophet Kendrick Lamar shows us that we are right where we need to be.
All right. Okay. All right. So good, good, good. You reminded me, I got to finish my paper on him. Okay.
yeah. And to that extent, I also just wrote on Pastor Troy's Vice Versa, it's prophetic rhetoric as well. So it's more beyond the golden age. So yeah, we gonna leave that. We have prophets across the era. We have about 60 seconds left. It just turned 10:14 Central Standard Time. So I did want to at least try to wrap up. If we have any closing comments from our panelists, um, just kind of open the floor for that.
No, go ahead and wrap us up. You can wrap.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up this session here to our panelists, Mr. Williams, Mr. Harris, Dr. Johnson. Thank you so much for sharing your scholarship and research. We're giving virtual hands here. But we will continue to, if there are any specific questions beyond this, we still have the chat open. We'll have much more time for discussion. We are going to take a 15-minute recess, and we'll be right back in this room right at 10:30. All right. So thank you so much. We'll close this panel out now.